My name is Barrett Anderson. I'm the Administrative Director at NOFA Mass. You are attending Parenting and the Land, Growing a Farm and a Family with Mike Roberts today. Mike is, let's see, I have a little bio here to read about him. Mike is a mechanical engineer turned farmer. He and his also engineer wife, Kelli, learned how much they liked farming after spending a year working on an organic farm between graduate school and the professional world. After returning to the field of engineering, they continued to feel a pull towards farming and started making plans for their own farm. For the first years after founding the farm in 2009, they each held offsite jobs, but after pouring their hearts and souls into starting Roots Farm, they are now both able to focus on the farm full-time, in addition to raising their family, a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. Before we jump in, I have a few details to review with you. We are presenting this conference on land that was inhabited by the Nipmuc people prior to European colonization. To learn more and honor those whose land you now occupy, please visit the native land map at https://native-land.ca. We recognize that our agricultural system is built on stolen land and the forced labor and exploitation of stolen Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Our conference aims to help to address this harm and to bring equity to the food system. We do have a BIPOC and White Ally Caucus group directly following this session at from 1 to 2 o'clock. We have some wonderful sponsors who have helped to make this conference happen. Here's a list of some of them and a few more. And we do have an online winter conference auction. You can go to rallyup.com/NOFA winter auction. There's also a QR code to scan. QR codes are pasted throughout the hallways as well. And that brings me to the end of my little speech. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to Mike. Move out of the way.
Hi, I'm Mike. Let me just get my slides going here. Yeah.
Let's see.
That one. All right. And then I guess if I'm not in the camera frame, then sure, I'll just that for that. All right. So, again, I'm Mike Roberts. I run Roots Farm with my wife Kelli in Tiverton, Rhode Island. And today we talk about parenting and farming. So, talk is going to be split into 3 parts. First, introduction, why this is kind of like a topic that we're talking about. Second, the managing the farm part of the equation, and third, the kids part of the equation. So, again, in a fancy chart, we got the farm, we got the family, we got the intersection. That's what we're talking about today. So again, why are we talking about this? There's 3 reasons why farming with a family is different. Let's say like running any other enterprise with a family. The first is this like farming mythology that's grown up about like this farm family, where there's these expectations that like this is what a farm family is. And so there's these expectations both that we have ourselves when we go into it, and that we like keep hearing from others. It's like if people tell kids like, oh, this is great, your kids are growing up on the farm. It's something. And again, like I feel like this is a topic that comes up in farming a lot. I doubt that in other professions it comes up as much. Like accounting conference probably doesn't have like a balance in the books and the family talk. So there's like this mythology, but it is rooted in reality. There is a reason why it's a thing, and one of them is this like massive time pressure that farmers face. You know, BK is before kids. What I tell people is before kids, you have your work time and you have your personal time. And work time is pretty obvious. Personal time, you know, includes like fun stuff, but it also includes the laundry and the dishes. But there's usually time for doing that and hanging out with your friends. So it's kind of like, okay, that's personal time. Once you have kids, there's your work time, your personal time, and your family obligations. And you can kind of guess which one is the one that's like shrinks to zero if you don't take care of it. And with farms, you have, you know, your kids have their own demands, you know, what they need on their timeline. You can't just be like, oh, you know, I'll just give you breakfast, lunch, and dinner after dark when I've done my farm work. They need their routines, they need attention as the day goes on. Your farm needs attention as the day goes on too. You know, one of the pictures I chose here are some, by the way, some of these pictures, like I just put in pictures because I thought they were cool pictures. Other pictures are related to what I'm talking about. This one's related to what I'm talking about. This is a, you know, can you see this okay, or should I try to shut the lights off a little bit? All right. Because this might not be clear, but in this bottom side here, you can just see these are carrots coming up. And so this is like a bed of, like 4 beds of carrots. But then it was just all coming up and down Soga. And it's like, all right, well, this has to be hoed today, or else like those carrots are done. And so, you know, this is an example of like, okay, on the farm, like this is a task that has to be done today, or you can like forget about it. You have your kids have these things you have to be done today. You have the farm has to be things to be done today. You get caught in the middle. The saying "make hay while the sun shines." Usually, people interpreted that as like, oh, you know, take advantage of your opportunities as they come. But in farming, sun is shining, you're out there making hay. It's not like this is what you have to be doing. It's so. And then the third piece of this, why farming with family matters, is the economics of it. Farming isn't the only profession that, you know, eats up all your time, but it eats up all your time without necessarily compensating you for it. And so, you know, if you're a doctor, yeah, sure, okay, maybe you got like lots of hours, but you can spend your money to like make that workable. One of the reasons this becomes a squeeze for farmers is because oftentimes we don't have that option of just like hiring more or doing whatever. So that's kind of how we end up in this, like, hey, let's talk about farming with kids because it's a challenge. A couple of principles to lay out there is like, oh, and by the way, another thing is, you know, if anyone has questions, you can feel free to interrupt. One of the things of raising kids is I'm used to interruptions. It's not going to fade me. So I might not answer your question right away, but so, you know, every farm family situation is unique. You know, a farm is unique by the size of the farm, this amount of sales, the type of products, the marketing channels, number of employees, soil types, proximity to cities. All these things make a farm unique. Likewise, the family and the kids are unique. You know, do the parents have off-farm jobs? Do both parents work on the farm? Does one work on the farm, one work on site? There's only one parent, or there's one parent who works on the farm, the other's a stay-at-home parent. Kids have different temperaments. Every kid is unique. You know, different like developmental stages, ages of the kids. So you have multiple siblings, what the age of the siblings are, the culture that you're coming from, both like broader culture and how you were raised. So all those factors from both. I think this actually does turn also.
Yeah.
But all those things make your situation unique. And so like combine that with the second principle, which is, you know, both in parenting and in farming, what the bathroom is. It's a great time to wash the floor. And then they're going to start weed whacking on here. So both in parenting and in farming, there is a huge swath of knowledge, different areas, and you don't know what you don't know until it bites you in the, there's another word that should be in there and got cut off. This is probably supposed to be family friendly talk, so I'll leave that word off. You can fill in the blanks. Right. You know, so if you're a parent, like one of my friends like to say is like, oh, your first kid, you kind of think like, oh, when it's like your child grows up, you think like, oh, they're anxious around dogs. Maybe I should have like exposed them to dogs more, or like, oh, they're so smart and they learn to read so early, and you like kind of think like what you're doing is like definitely impacting one-on-one, one-to-one, or how the child is progressing. And then if you have a second child, you realize like there's not necessarily a one-to-one. Every kid is like an innate temperament, and you don't necessarily get to influence your kids, but you can't necessarily. It's not a blank slate. Same thing with farming. Anytime you get outside advice, basically the confluence of principle 1 and 2 is that any advice you get, there's no one true farm and not one true path for either farming or planting. Every situation is unique, and so all the advice you get, including what I'm saying today, any advice should be given and received with like, this is what worked for me, or and maybe if you think it might work for you, you should give it a try. And I think this is important both if you're giving advice and if you're hearing advice, because as someone remarked, I think you never receive more unsolicited advice in your life. Well, I guess that never happened to me, but as when you're walking around like physically pregnant, then like strangers will walk up to you and start like bombarding you with unsolicited advice. Same thing if I did have it like holding a baby, then you get the advice as well. But and so you kind of have to like steel yourself against that in a, people are well-meaning, but they don't always frame their advice in this like so having said that everyone's situation is unique and all our, now is a good time to tell you about our situation, about Woods Farm and our situation with family, about a bit of a history of the farm and timeline of our family. So you can kind of like, I don't know, like set yourself in where your mind frame would be relative to where I'm coming from. So me and my wife, Kelly, run the farm full time. So if you hear me say Kelly, that's my wife, I will find it easier to say Kelly than to say my wife and get started and say my wife all the time. We're down here in East Bay, Rhode Island. It's zone 7A. We're certified organic. Our property is 6.25 acres. We do about 2 acres of vegetables. We bought this property in 2010. This is can you see this at all? You say no. Yes. So is that anything or? Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. You might have trouble like writing notes down now, but does that look fine from?
No.
I mean,
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so it's kind of dark here. This is an aerial view of the farm. We do live on the farm. This is our house right here where the peg is. So it's a kind of L-shaped. Border goes here. This little field here. That's these woods are in our property. But yes, actually living on the farm, that's something else too. That's part of the situation. And we do winter growing. We do 6 movable high tunnels, 30 by 48. We have a 18 by 48 seedling house. We have a seedling house. The farm's divided into 32.5 plots that are 30 by 48. So those movable tunnels are kind of like the modular backbone. All our beds are the same length. Each plot is 8 beds of 46 feet long. Gross sales in the last year was around 310K. Net before taxes and depreciation was about 100K. If you average out a gross sales over all the beds we grew last year, about $28 a bed foot per year for a bed. Last summer we had about 7 employees, not all of them full time, in addition to me and Kelly working full time. So you can see like the plots, and let's see. So that's definitely a high tunnel there. It's hard to see on the area where the high tunnels are, but there's 4 of them here, 2 of them here, and this is a new expansion in the back that we're doing. So these are some pictures where we started. This is a brighter one before we had the backfield. So we started on rented land in 2009. This is our nice fertile patch that we started with, and this is Kelly doing the Brockford on that rented land. It was used to be a horse pasture. It felt like concrete. And this was our start of a new property, and this was taken a couple of years ago now. After we had our couple of kids. So this slide here is our timeline. I know it just looks like a big table with lots of numbers. It's actually like took me a long time to put this together, and it kind of really tells the story of our farm. So I might spend a little time on this because I thought it was kind of interesting after I looked at it. Can they see on the Zoom this, or
Yeah.
should I stand? Maybe if I sit here.
Well, I think, let me just share this screen and then
So,
people will be
as
able
long as I can see it here. All right,
Just
so
wait for, I'm going to have to make.
one of
this
the funny
small for
things
one
was,
minute, sorry.
in putting this table together, it was that like the number of lines surprised me. Like in my head, it's still like, oh yeah, we've been farming for like 5 or 6 years. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of lines on the table. So then we started with gross sales. The first year we had a couple of plots. We started at 6K. Then we grew more the following year. Then so around 2012, something happened. Our gross sales started going down. Can't quite put my finger on what happened in 2012. And with the birth of our first child, then it became kind of difficult to run. I had an off-farm job.
Sorry about that.
Off-farm job, a child, and a farm that we're trying to get up off the ground. In 2013, Kelli was like, something's got to get here. And so then, one more. There we go. Okay. And in 2014, I left my off-farm job, and that's when we really kind of like were able to dedicate ourselves to the farm. You can see that. Okay. Then our gross sales kind of turned around, and we got ourselves on our feet. Number of plots, those are those 30 by 50 plots that I mentioned, and you can see like the expansion of our growing area. Number of high tunnels we have, these are like the production movable high tunnels. Number of employees. You see how we started, we didn't have any employees, and then once we had kids, we realized like we kind of need employees to make this work. And then in 2016 was the birth of our youngest son. We started with like one market, then we went to 2 summer, 1 winter markets. Eventually we went to, we had to do 3 summer and 2 winter markets. That's what we are right now. And this, we also have some, this one for the seedling house. The barn house is our storage greenhouse, pool box, well and hydrants, a bigger pool box, and deer fence in the backfield. So, and then in terms of employees, over here, FTE means full-time equivalent, and that's for like a 2,000 hour per year. So you can see like even in 2016 we had 3 employees, but they were part-time. So that's kind of where we are for staffing right now. And in terms of gross sales students, like once 2014, we really started expanding our sales till about 2020. At about 2020 when we kind of like, I feel like we had the next developmental stage of the farm as a business where we're kind of like leveling out and becoming like a mature business. Go ahead.
Can I take a picture of this? Just really easy.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah. All right. So I won't.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Like the uniforms, the winter markets, summer markets, how do you get through some of it?
What do you mean? How do I get free?
Well, I'm just, could you just explain that, what that is? Is that when you sell them? Is that what you?
Farmers market. So we do
Okay,
three farmers
farmers
markets.
markets.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah,
3 different
so
ones.
yeah. So
Okay.
our marketing, we pretty much do everything direct to consumer. We do very little wholesale.
Okay.
So we do 3 summer farmers markets, 2 winter farmers markets, and a summer and winter CSA as well. I could have put in like our summer and winter CSA share numbers, but that would have been another thing to look up. And
So was that your main retail, was your farmers market?
honestly, it's ranges from. It is, I think, it's about in half, 40 to 60 either way, depending on the year. And it's also like depending on like as we were growing, sometimes the CSA was more, sometimes the market's more. I think at this point it's probably 60% farmers market, 40% CSA.
Question about when you have your first kid
Mhm.
and decide to hire an employee that was early in your farm's life.
Yeah.
How did you make that decision, and like financially, is that scary or?
Sure, I might remind me about that later. I feel like later in the talk, I'll talk a bit more about kind of like the child side. I think I'm about to go into the like managing the farm side. So I think, yeah, I'll get to that later. But there was something that you said that kind of, oh, and for those at home, she was asking about hiring the first employee when we had our first child and kind of like financials behind that and was that scary? And I said I would talk about it later. But I feel like there's something there that I meant to say now and I can't remember. Yeah, all right. It'll come to me. All right. So like I said, that's kind of like a bit of a background, what we're talking about, why, where I'm coming from with this. One last thing that I don't know if I said it, I didn't, the reason I'm up here talking about this is not because this is easy for me, but because it's hard. And we had a really hard time with it, and I think we're not the only ones, and so we feel like other people could benefit from like some perspective on this. So if you're looking for a talk that's like, oh, do these 5 things and your life will be easier, maybe there's a talk somewhere else about that. All right, so back to this farm family, not to scale, because most of the time what we're looking at is this. The farm expands and takes over your entire life. And you can see that when that happens, this little sliver intersection can vanish. So we need to really kind of like shrink this farm down to a manageable level to make room for that intersection between the farm and the family. That's kind of this part 2 of the talk. So kind of like I mentioned a little bit before, but another kind of principle is, you know, we don't control our kids. We can only influence them, and even our influence is limited. My inspiration for thinking about this was, you know, I made the mistake of going on like an online chat room about parenting one time, and someone posted like, oh, you know, I have my 2 girls just fight all the time, and it's like, I'm like, oh, this sounds familiar. My boys fight all the time. And I was like, all right, let's see what people say. And I could like one of the responses, I could almost like see the finger wagging behind this response. It's like, you know, you're the adult, you need to be in control of the situation. And I was like, well, you know, this person probably just has no idea what it's like to have kids like this. And isn't like giving the advice in the sense of like, try this, it might work. Because from my experience, we don't have that level of control over our kids. If your kids are going to fight, you can't like control them. The only thing you can do is influence, and we have limited what we can influence. We can influence the environment, and we can influence our own actions as adults. That's kind of like what we can do. Our kids don't have little buttons and controls, and even our influence on those things is limited. The environment, there's other adults around. You know, if you're running a farm, there's the farm. There's if you take them to the grocery store, there's like outside society that has their own expectations and stuff, and our own reactions. Well, I don't know, and our own temperament. If you, I'm trying to think of how to say this. You never knew how poor your self-control was till you were around your own kids, and your own kids just know exactly what to do to get a reaction out of you. And so even your own actions aren't like exactly under your control, because you can't, you know, as much as you try. So, you know, we do what we can. And again, if we want to do these, like having to like be around our kids and have relationships, then we need to spend time with them. And if we need to if we want to spend time with the kids, that like big farm circle has to come down to a manageable level. You need to have the time to be flexible with your environment, influence the environment to like make it a positive environment for your kids. Money is important too. Money helps to influence the environment, including either like for childcare or for other like ways to enrich the environment for your kids. And finally, you know, your own reactions. If you're stressed from work, that's not going to help you keep your cool at all. So, like I mentioned, the first step, the farm has to make money. I feel like when I started this, I almost feel like it probably have like 2 camps of people. Like one camp would say like, well, obviously it's going to have to make money. Like, that's why I'm here. Tell me how to do this. And another camp might be like, I'm supposed to be a capitalist, dirty money grubbing capitalist now. But it doesn't mean that all our goals, all our decisions have to be focused on money, but we need like a bar to get over. And once you get over that bar, it makes everything much easier. And we go into farming for all these other goals, to raise our kids in a positive environment, to positive impact on our community, positive impact on the environment, the society. But if we don't make money, then we're going to give up the farm, and then we're not going to accomplish any of those goals. We can't do any of those things when we go work for the Amazon warehouse. So we need to have the time. We need to have the farm make enough money. Once you have the time, then you can kind of like keep your own sanity. So if you have a well-managed farm, you can get those things. So I'm going to go through a few resources for trying to get your farm, into that like manageable stage. A couple of books and some other. The first book, The Lean Farm, that's been out since 2015. Any of you familiar with that book? Yeah, good. I think it's a very helpful book. It seeks to apply some lean manufacturing techniques to a farm situation. Overall, I think it's a helpful book. I didn't find it to be like a all-encompassing book. Like if you follow this one book, you will turn your farm around. I felt like it had good tactics, like concrete things. This is what you can do, but I felt like it was less useful strategically in terms of like, okay, well, what do I focus my energy on now? Because clearly I have limited resources and time to do this. I felt like it was less good at like honing that intuition as to what do I do now. One example of like my first read through, there was a picture of like, they're, I think staking and weaving tomatoes, and he says, well, pruning and trellising tomatoes is a non-value added. Your customers don't care whether your tomatoes are pruned or not, and so you need to minimize it. And at the time we were pruning and trellising our tomatoes to single leaders in our high tunnels. I'm like, well, do I really? And I kind of like intuitively felt like that was the right thing for us. And so it's like, well, trying to square what he said with that, but then later in reading it through again, there's a later principle where it says, okay, you also need to maximize use of your fixed inputs, including greenhouses and growing space. So it's like, all right, well, now I see where the tension comes from. We want to reduce that time spent on the pruning and trellising because that's not value added work, but the pruning and trellising is maximizing our planted space and greenhouse space. So where do you draw the line? What's important to your operation? And I feel like if you don't have a bank of intuition to fall back on to make those decisions, some of these aren't as useful. Again, and some people I feel like fall into the, trying to like be lean just to like fill in the check off the boxes and the jar, like lean for lean's sake instead of accomplishing something. So, but like I said, we did find it useful in terms of like setting up the farm systems for make it easier to have our workers be independent. SOP is a standard operating procedure. That's one of the things he talks about in the lean farm. Clean up an organization of the farm. And one example of like something we did concrete was like this bed prep card. It's one of my favorite things. All the tools we use for bed prep are on this card. We live on this card permanently. There's buckets for the soil amendments we use. The clipboard that's like our amendment recipes on it. There's like marking stakes, trucks for clearing crops. The broad fork, the rakes, the hose that we use for clearing the wheel hoe are all on there. So it's like, all right, we're gonna go prep beds, check that the buckets are filled up, wheel it out, and we're ready to go. We used to just like have to gather all up by the hoe, and you put everything on the cart, and you go out, you get out to the field, and you realize you forgot XYZ, or like this one time you need the garden rakes, you're gonna go back and get it. And we prep beds a lot. So okay, that's useful. Organization and SOPs are useful for, especially for when you have employees. There's nothing worse than having to trip over like 10 things to show your employees where things are, or like every time they need a tool, you're the one that has to go get it because it is buried, and you know exactly where it is, but it's buried or something. And once you kind of like have things, and the SOPs too, once you have your things organized, it helps a lot to offload it. SOPs can be a written document, but more important is almost like the thought process that goes behind it. getting it in your head, like this is what the task is. So when you explain it to someone, even if it's not written, at least it's in your head of like, this is what the task is, and this is how I explain it to someone.
Yeah, I'm wondering, this might get, I don't want to deep in your relationship life, but is it easy or, like, depending on, basically what I'm trying to ask is developing these, like, sometimes I feel like it can cause conflict amongst, making these sorts of decisions, like where the this goes, and even, operating just like how you, where, and what you want to plan, like, does that stuff intersect with your family as well?
Let me just, so the question is how, making these decisions of organization and how to do stuff, and do you mean like the relationship between me and Kelly, or?
Your standard operating procedures, are they a reflection of your family life in the way?
Are they a reflection of they're not really a reflection of the family life. This is just a way of getting the farm kind of like to a point where you can walk away from it and it continues to run. That's kind of what we're trying to go for
But
here,
it's not a
because
point of conflict.
it's not a point of conflict. No, it's actually like if you do this, you'll reduce conflict.
Great.
Because there's nothing worse than like telling someone to do something, but then you get pulled away because you have to like put the baby down for a nap or something, you come back and it's not done correctly, or that's when you learn to manage your frustration. So yeah, and again, a lot of this is like, in that it's not in the first year. It's like you almost have to like do it for a couple of years till you realize, oh, like, something like bagging greens. It's amazing how many ways there are to mess a task up. And you never know until you have like a variety of people tackling the same task, and like what not just like the different levels of, you could call it messing it up, but things that are done differently that then cause problems down the line. And like, we're very particular about like, this is how many bags go in a bin, and this isn't, like, and you write down the numbers. And I don't want to like get too sidetracked into that, but yeah, it is actually a good tool for reducing conflict because it makes the expectations for everyone clear, both for yourself as to what you're trying to explain to your employees, you and your partners, so that you're both on the same page when you're trying, like, you don't have one person, I'm coming around telling them to do something and then Kelly comes around and telling them to do something else. It still happens, but at least on like some of these basic tasks, it doesn't happen. All right, so the second resource book I want to talk about is The Goal. This one, I don't think it has made the rounds of farming yet. This was an assigned text for a manufacturing class I took in college. And so it's definitely like focus on manufacturing. It's a story about a struggling factory manager that then like turns his operation around. But just like in the lean farm, where those are techniques that started in a manufacturing situation, so are these techniques and thought processes really is the more important part, applicable to a broader area. And this, I feel like this book gives that missing strategic piece that I think the lean farm lacks. That said, as a book, it's it's kind of like written as a novel, following like this factory manager on. It's a little cheesy or whatever, but whatever. You get through it. And so the underlying thought process, he calls the theory of constraints. And so, the theory of constraints is similar to limiting factors. Constraints is a little bit of a broader, well, both broader and at the same time more precise term. Often when we think of limiting factor, we think of limiting factor of production. That's kind of like where our mind jumps to, but a constraint can be anything in the operation. It doesn't have to be anything to do with production. And most often on farms, production is not the problem. So in this, the key insight is that the constraints limit like the whole operation. So once you can figure out what your constraints are, then that's what I need to focus on. So if my constraints are my high tunnel space, my growing area, then yes, it's more important to prune and trellis those tomatoes. If my constraint is not, if I have like a 2-acre high tunnel, and who cares how much space my tomatoes take or how many plantings I do, then the time put into them might be more of an issue. And so, again, with that in a factory setting, he's got all these different machine tools, and like the one machine that like the entire production process has to go through is the machine that's like, if that machine's down, the whole factory's down. And so, but any other machines that aren't a constraint or any other steps that aren't a constraint, if you increase how much production those are doing, it doesn't help you at all, because no matter what, it's the constraints that are going to limit what you're doing. So, and this, again, it's like, well, how does that fit into like the farm circle? Once you figure out where your constraints are, everything else you can kind of scale back. If you're like, well, growing area isn't a limiting factor for me, I can like cut my growing area by 25% and still grow this, still sell the same amount. That's going to help you shrink your, and at the same time, let's see, 2 common constraints: sales and the farmer's time, right? So growing area is not usually a constraint. And so if you kind of realize, okay, that's where I'm limited by, you can focus on those. The Boy Scout hiking trip, I might, if I have time, I'd come back to it, but I feel like I'll probably run out of time. So sales is a constraint. We want to make sure we focus on sales. That means that if, you're not selling everything you're producing, cut back what you're producing so that you are, or work on increasing those sales so that you are selling a higher proportion. I've seen this saying around: a farm without sales is a compost pile. That's not original. I've read it somewhere. So, I'm not the only one saying focus on your sales. But if you're focusing on your sales, focus on like how those work, both on, sales work on habits. Like, for example, at the farmer's market, everyone asks me, oh, do you have arugula? No, do you have arugula? No. People have been asking me arugula for weeks. I finally bring it. I'm like, oh, everyone's gonna be so excited. I have arugula. And then I barely sell any because everyone comes like, oh, I just bought arugula at the store. It's like, oh, I'll get it next week. And so it's like everyone works on their vegetables on habit. And if you can be consistent, be at the market every week with a good selection every week, that's how you build your sales. And again, it's something that for your own channels, work on your own intuition. Farmer's time is the other key constraint. I feel like no matter how much acreage, how much employees, how much, whatever the operation, the farmer's time is like common to every operation. And so you have to evaluate as a constraint over the whole farm when it's the busy season. So how much is your time worth during the busy season? I threw some numbers out there. Say you're grossing 120K, you have your 90K expenses, assuming 2,000 hours in a year. Okay, so $15 an hour. Now this is how you calculate your average annual hourly wage, but it's not the value of your time to the farm, because when you're not there, nothing happens on the farm. All your expenses have already accrued. Your crew's showing up. You've paid your stall fees. But if you're not there, then the priorities aren't getting set, the tasks aren't getting done, and the sales aren't going to be there. So the risk of your time not being available is not to the net, it's to the gross. So if you really want to know how much your time is worth in the busy season, divide your hours by your gross sales, $60 an hour. In this example, that's more of a, so if you're deciding, should I delegate tasks? Do I hire employees? That's a more realistic number to keep in mind, especially in the busy season. Now, that said, it depends on like the maturity of the operation also, because money is money at the same time, like you do need cash flow. And so it's not necessarily licensed to throw away money on this, but it is make sure you don't get stuck on like, it's like, well, I can, set up the irrigation in like half the time and by employees. So it's like I keep doing it, but if I train someone to do it, even if it takes them twice as long, it's that much that I don't have to do, and I can like make sure the rest of the farm runs smoothly. All right. Next kind of resources on the farm side is what I call heuristics. Heuristics are like mental shortcuts on like how are the numbers working on the farm. And again, if you want the farm to make money, you have to pay attention to the money. Someone on the farm has to be paying attention to the money because it doesn't naturally happen. It's hard to make money on the farm, and if you don't focus on it, it's not going to happen. So, I went to a farm accounting workshop, and she wanted us to like do your QuickBooks every day. It's like 15 minutes a day in your QuickBooks and stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, but maybe I only have 15 minutes in the evening or a half an hour. I'm not going to spend that 15 minutes doing my QuickBooks. I don't care how much, you say it's going to help me. And so we really need a shortcut. So the 3 heuristics I'll talk about, our most important one is our like yield per bed in dollars per bed. We do it per bed because all our beds are the same length. And so if I get the dollars per bed, it's generalized to the whole farm. If you can do per bed foot, per acre, whatever works for you. And the third rule, dollar harvest per hour. If I probably skip the heuristics I don't like because I'll run out of time. But so dollars per bed is probably our most important like shortcut number we track. If you're starting up, you can use that as okay. Well, if I assume a certain yield per bed, I can kind of figure out what my gross might be for the year, just as a rough number. But in season, you can use it as a spot check. All right, I just harvested a quarter bed of radishes. I got 30 bunches. The sale for that is this, that. How's that planting of radishes doing? Relative to last year, relative to my targets. So that kind of like keeps you in touch of like how my things are going. Postseason, this is our like postseason table on, it's all the crops in order in dollars per bed is like last column. And so, it goes from shishito's managed at the top, and jalapenos, celeriac is at the very bottom for this year. And so once you kind of have like a few years of information on this, then you can kind of like, one, adjust your planting plan for next year. Again, make sure sales lead because that's how like okay, jalapenos. I'm not going to grow an entire high ton of jalapenos because I know I can't sell them at this price. But you can make a decision on like if I want to increase something that's selling or like cut poor performers. This is a guide. Also, how much time you spend on a crop. Carrots are whatever, $400 or $500 a bed. How much time do I want to spend hand weeding them or thinning them? But again, it's not a be all, I don't know, end all be all or be all end all, one way or the other. It's not, whatever it is, it's not it. And the example is scallions. There was one year where I was like, scallions, we grow them 3 rows per bed in clumps, transplanted out. And I was like, we grow them 4 rows per bed. We can like get a higher dollars per bed on the scallions. And then like partway through the year, I'm like, God, it's taking forever to clean up the scallions. Like, what is wrong with? And then I realized it's because we were proud of the scallions. So now instead of doing a bunch of scallions being like 8 to 12 like good sized scallions, it was like 20 to 30 little weedy ones, and like it was taking forever. And that made me realize like, okay, this dollars per bed is a good guideline, but you have to then anchor it with what surrounding that crop, how much time you're putting into it and stuff. So don't get too wrapped up in just a number. Also, you don't need to make it more complicated than it is. Some people look at dollars per bed foot per week. I don't like, that's one of my heuristics I don't like, but I feel like it's more complicated. It doesn't add any new information. So balance numbers with the intuition, focus on crops that sell, that have high value. And obviously you need records to do this because if you don't have records on what you harvested, you don't have records on what you're yielding. So for records, you need harvest records. So that gives you your crop yields and dollars per bed. You also need the planting plan. That also gives you the number of beds you grew. And, sometimes at the end of the year, we're like, did we add another bed of this or that? And we kind of have to like go piece it back together, but at least we have a start. Sales records too, and then notes for next year. We have in our planting plan binder, we have a few pages at the front where we can just make notes as we go through the year. And then at the end of the year, we can look through and be like, oh, we were short salad in August. We should have done more salad. We couldn't sell all our first planting of radishes. We should cut some of those. Like this variety did well, this variety did not. It doesn't have to be super organized, but having that in one place is nice for then referring back at the next end of the year. Harvest records. We don't do, this is our harvest sheet. This is like our CSA, plus then we put our market wish. what we actually harvest, and then what comes back at the end. So this way, we don't like, it's not like then we keep super track of this in terms of like, we sold 75.8% of our whatever. It's more like, all right, this is how much salad we brought this week, how much salad we want to bring next week, that kind of thing. And also, to have at least a sense of how things are going. We also have the daily harvest records for things that aren't. So this sheet is for our scheduled harvest of like beans and stuff for the markets. This is for unscheduled harvest, like cute soups you pick almost every day. Tomatoes kind of like have their own harvest schedule. Some bigger farms might use like a point of sale system to track their sales. And that just gives you automatically how much you sold. We haven't gotten into that yet. I don't really feel like I feel like we're small enough that, and we're involved in the markets enough that we can get our own sense of what sells and doesn't. Planting plan, I better kind of move along a little bit. All right, 1/3, 1/3. This is just my way of thinking of gross proceeds of the crop. I usually think of it, okay, 1/3 to production, 1/3 to sales, 1/3 to overhead. And basically that way, so if I have $600 of carrots, the production should have been about 200. And same if I do like 1,200 sales at the market, production for that should have been 400. This is kind of like a way to like go from like your harvested amount to how much time you should spend on it. So you're not like, because then especially with things like peas and stuff, you're like, oh, we just picked like $600 worth of peas. It's like, yeah, but the product, how much time you spent on picking, plus the trellising, plus all that. But yeah, so it's good for decision making. So I gotta like move through some of these a little quicker. Dollars harvested per hour is kind of similar to the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule, but it's just a way of keeping track of how your labor is doing. It's a good way to track it at this step because this step is close to where the money is, and so it's like if you track your harvest, it's easy to assign a dollar value for that. Whereas you track your like cultivation time, it's harder to assign a dollar value of the output. But it's kind of, again, so you could use this in a similar way to the 1/3, 1/3, and you can either do it as a one person doing one crop, or the whole crew is doing a harvest day, and at the end, how much did you harvest that day? I'll skip the heuristics I don't like because I'm going to run out of time. All right, so last couple of things on the farm side. This goes till 12?
12:30.
Oh, thank God. All right. I'm like, I thought I had 10 minutes left. I gotta move through this. All right. I'll still skip the heuristics I don't like, but I can read a little easier, so that's good. All right. So far what I talked about managing the farm was kind of like on a few resources for trying to get the farm to make money. On the other side of having the farm be somewhere you can like live with, there's resiliency, and this is resiliency not just like in the face of like climate change and stuff, other disruptions. This is resiliency in the face of like everyday disruptions that happen when you're a family with kids, and really like any person has. Like people get sick, employees fall out, whatever comes up, you need to, a farm that's resilient in the face of those will definitely be easier to deal with. And basically, okay, so one of the reasons we had employees, when we first started out, we felt like, oh, we actually did want to run the farm without employees, like me and Kelli by ourselves, we're not gonna like rely on anyone else, we're gonna do this. And then once we had kids, we're like, we're not gonna do this. If it's between us and the two kids, any one of us gets sick and we could potentially lose out. If either me or Kelli gets sick, we could knock out, if it was just us, would knock out 100% of our workforce for that day. Because like maybe one of us was working, one of us supposed to be with the kids, but one of us is sick, so one of us is not working, and the other one is still with the kids. No work gets done. So we found that like having the employees helps build a resilient farm. Actually, one other point that everyone. Well, okay, so resilience is the opposite of efficiency. We have all the chains of steps that happen in a farm. And if you cut everything that happens down to the bone, so you have the exact amount, the exact amount of staffing you need for that day, and the exact amount of this, and the exact amount of that. Anytime something happens, then the whole chain breaks, in any of those steps. And so to be resilient, you need some slack, and that counts for, crops in the ground, and also how much like time you have available for people to do stuff. For us, having employees is probably like the biggest factor of the resiliency of the farm. There's probably other like material factors that go into that too, but I just haven't like wrapped my head around it yet. But in terms of like having employees, if you have like a staffing level where if someone calls out, you're not totally screwed, or if someone gets sick in the family, employee retention, so you're not training new people all the time. And then employee training and independence, so those employees can, the more tasks I can write down on a list, and you're like, here's what you're going to do today, I'm leaving, the better you are feel. And it's not like everything can happen like that, and that, but, especially in the middle of the growing season where we're doing a lot of like what I think of as like the bread and butter of the farm, like the bed prep, seeding, transplanting, cultivating, harvesting. And you're like, this is what you're going to do. You've already done it all before. See you later. We're going to the beach. And in 2020, this was a huge boost for us to get through the COVID disruptions because all that childcare, camps, anything, all that went away. Then having that slack lets you address any like issues that come up with the farm that are non-standard, like pests and diseases. Well, the cukes are all dying. If you don't have time to deal with it, you're like, well, see you later, cukes. We'll do something else. But if you have time to look at it, call the extension agent, and like kind of figure out what's going on, you might actually be able to learn from that. Same with like improvements on the farm. All these things that, you walk around your farm like, oh man, I wish I had this better or this better. You can't make any improvements unless you have the time and attention to do it. It's just basically keeping your head above water. Last on the farm management thing I wanted to discuss is scale. And when I talk about scale, if we do one number, it's not acreage, it's really gross sales. I think gross sales is a better proxy for like the complexity of the whole operation, whether it's a, small acreage like we're doing that does all retail sales, or a bigger acreage that does wholesale. That like one number kind of encompasses like the complexity. So like I said, if you saw that table, we've kind of like scaled up for a while, and now we're kind of like where we want to be in terms of that. And what we found is that we scaled up, we were able to have more staffing that actually gave us like more resilience in the face of like, if COVID had hit earlier in our farm development, it would have been a lot different for us. We found it allows us to have a higher net income because if you have, you can get by a higher net income with the same margins, you know what I mean? It's like if you have a lower gross sales, you really have to have a high margin to get your net income there. But again, increasing sale, this is gross sales. So as your scale gets bigger, you have to make sure your sales are what is leading your growth, because that is, the number that matters, not your production. On the flip side, why we kind of like are leveling off now is that we feel like we're hitting a roof of what we're happy with the scale, and like we haven't like crossed that, but as your scale gets bigger, your consequences of failure go up. Because as the farmer owners, you're the final backstop when either for routine backstop or emergency backstop. So again, like the routine stuff, the evening office work. This is a picture of my kids harvesting cutes and zooks on Sunday. It's like the kind of weekend work when there's watering the seedlings, running the sprinklers, all that stuff that kind of like happens in the background. That when as you get bigger becomes not negligible. And in terms of emergencies, again, if you have $100,000 worth of tomato plants and there's a blackout, and you got to figure out a way to save those plants, then a friend of like Skip, who runs Wishing Stone, was saying is like that happened, and then they're trying to get the generator running, but then someone filled the generator tank with diesel instead of gasoline, and it was just like a whole. And I can't imagine, like I can't imagine like being in that situation where you have like such a high, like, so much hanging over. And then you're the last ones there to like make it all work. So that's kind of where we found we're kind of like at a happy level. All right. So that's that section. We can, we have this run back down to where we want it, so we can start about the middle. But before I move on to that, I don't know if there's any questions on the previous section that we.
Explore the possibility of perennials to come down on
So
something.
have we explored the possibility of perennials? I mean, we actually did. We had an asparagus patch, and we had it, and we don't have it anymore because we didn't take care of it, and so we found it. We just tilled it up and planted more annual vegetables. One thing we found is that, overall, we found we do better when we focus. We focus on our annual vegetables and our retail sales, and we do those things well. And we have a few laying hens. At some point we thought, well, we do like a bigger flock and like have like sell eggs, but like, or do, we have like a few fruit trees. We have some raspberries. All those things have like a different set of skills that are required and a different set of like attention that's required. And sometimes, we found well, again, it depends on what you feel like. We found that for us, it was better to just focus on the vegetables. And, we do some of that stuff for us, the raspberries and stuff, just to have around. But to do them on a scale for production, it's just not something we know how to do well. I feel like now we've talked about adding asparagus back in. I think if we did it now, we would probably have more success with it. But that's a matter of like, well, we already tilled that up and planted vegetables. We got to find somewhere else for that to go. We don't know where yet. So.
I don't know if this is a question for now or for after, but in your introduction, like, says that you guys were engineers, right? Like, what was like your motivation for kind of changing gears, switching lanes, and getting into farm?
What was our motivation for changing lanes from engineering into farming? I mean, it was kind of like a philosophical thing where, we wanted to have a job essentially where, and the order of priorities, I think, was like be self-employed, work together, ideally work from home, and do something that we can be proud of and like feel good about. So that's kind of how, and we explored different options and we settled on farming. That's not me. All right, so now we can talk about the kids side. So again, the real influence, another way of saying like our influence over our kids is limited is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And so, now we want to like influence the environment, for the benefit of our kids. Is this the next slide? Yeah, okay. So, step one, well, again, on this section, I think I'm a little bit more loosey-goosey on. I think on like the managing farm stuff, I think I was very like, that's like what I have my head wrapped around. Our life with our kids is a little bit more of like a basket case. And so I feel like this section of the presentation might reflect that a little bit. But, so in terms of like trying to get like your life with your kids into a rhythm, the first is establish the routine. Kids thrive on routines. The adults like routines also. As much as we might not admit it or like recognize it, it's like we like routines. So step one, set a work schedule both for yourself as a farmer. Then you can have a set work schedule for your employees too. That allows you to then slot in like the kid time into that as well. And that way, if there is time when you have to work more than that, it gives you a signal that like, hey, it's like 4 o'clock, or like 4 o'clock, I need to go pick up the kids, like I'm not done, or like I'm like working out under the lights. I don't want to, this is like not right. So you need that signal of like, I gotta make changes. And again, if it's something you do once in a while, it's not gonna like ruin you. But if you're doing that, 12, 16 hour, 15 hour, I don't know, whatever, I don't even care, however many hour days, it is gonna wear you down. So, it also, if you're already working overtime as an owner, you don't have that backstop. Whereas if you kind of like as an owner have like your schedule, when the employees call out or go on vacation or whatever, you at least have a bit of reserve of your own time to give. Same with like if the kids are sick and you have to stay home with the kids, again, having that reserve of your own time. Then, assign responsibilities, work and home. This is more, I'm talking about like between the parents. Again, work, who is in charge of the harvest targets, the harvest management, the crew management, training, hiring. And then at home, who's going to do the laundry that day, who's cooking that day, who's doing the shopping, who's going to drop off the kids. The more of this you kind of have talked about or figure out ahead of time, the less you end up both kind of looking at each other being like, are you working or are you going to get the, so it makes those transitions easier. Because again, since your time is so limited, making those transitions go smoothly means like, if I don't have to come in and check on stuff, then at the same time, I don't think I have it on this slide. No. You also don't want to just pawn all this stuff on the default parent and, I'm going to go do my field work and then like I'm checking later. I've gotten snippy remarks if I do that. So I've learned not to do that. And again, one word of like how Kelly and I manage the farm is we tend to, we farm together. And the way we kind of have like our areas of responsibility, they're kind of like delegated already. It's like Kelly does the planting plan and the harvest target and the harvest management, a lot of like the planning stuff. I do a lot of like the day-to-day crew management, crew training, cultivation, watering. And so, it kind of that, at least on the production side, makes it easier. That's like, who's responsible for what. But it means that, if I'm going to take the kids for a morning, I need to offload my task list to someone else. So parenting wise, another important step, form a support group. This is probably done best before the kids arrive. So once you're, know you have kids, it's good to like find a support group. And we found it very, very valuable. Other parents of similar age kids, other farmers with kids, even if their kids are older. So it can give you a reference for like, how does my experience stack up with other people? What did other people do when they were faced with the funds I'm having? And just like, help, can you just listen to me bitch and complain about this for the one thing, just use it as a support, but beware of the trap of like the resentment that builds up when you compare yourself to someone else. It's a real thing, it happens, trust me. So routine, support group, realistic expectations, the next one. Again, this probably ties back into the original first slide about like the farm family mythology, where like, oh, when the baby comes, you just put it in the carrier and you go on with your day. And I said, not really, the baby has other ideas about that. So, the realistic expectations come from external and also internal. And so, we have our hopes and dreams of what we want our life for our kids to be. And that's important, but at the same time, like, you also have to let go of some of those to live the life with the kids as they are and support your kids as they are. And some of that comes with like wanting the kids involved with the farm. Just remember that like the farm is work, and like, it's as much as we do the work because we value it, and it's a kind of almost like a philosophical thing we're doing. To the kids, it's just what mom and dad do for work, and if they can do it, it's fun. So we kind of have to like tie it in. You can involve the kids at the farm, but it's not quite straightforward. That said, kids have their own interests. You might your kids might love the farm and everything you do, but if our kids, if your kids' interests are in other areas, then you'll have to find a way to like bridge the gap between what their interests are and what you're doing. So, we keep trying to involve the kids in the farm, and we do to a certain extent without forcing it. So, invite them so once in a while if the kids are home, because hey, you guys want to come help me harvest this or that, and once in a while, once a summer, they'll be like yes, and we'll get them to help, and like the rest of the time, like I'd rather do something. But keep inviting them without forcing them, so they don't resent it. When they are involved, reward them. And it can be with like just simple praise. You can give them treats. You can even pay them once they get older. It's like, hey, if you help me work the farmer's market, I'll give you $30. I was like, oh sweet, I can buy Legos. And again, there's more to farming than just production. So you can have your kids, especially as the kids get older, they can be involved with more than just production. I know Pleasant Valley Farm in New York, with Paul and Sandy Arnold. They oldest kid, I say now, he's probably like in his 20s or 30s, but he runs his own business doing like sensors for farms. So like sensors for your greenhouse and your walking coolers that you can like look on your phone and like, see how all your widgets on the farm are doing. And so that was a way for him to be involved with the farm without doing actual like farming production work. It's like his interests were probably more on like the techie side. And so he branched off into this like techie branch without, so he was like still involved with the farm, but not necessarily in production. So, and then again, let's see, even in this picture, like this was a crop we were clearing. The kids had a grand old time. They were just like grabbing the plants and just like hucking them off the field. And I was just like, just they didn't have the best aim, so they get thrown into decent vegetable beds and whatever. But whatever, it was fun. And then this is them on the inside and grabbing some Hakurai. So even if their involvement is like, hey, I'm going to go pick something to eat, that's a plus. So and then again, sometimes as like I mentioned with like that techie work, they do better with their own independent stuff. My older son really liked the machines. He loved the tiller, loved all the mowers and everything. And he kept like, can we do the tiller? Can we do the tiller? And finally, I was like, fine. This is your garden. Whenever you want to do the tiller, we will do the tiller. And you can till it 10 times a year if you want, but we're not doing the tiller on the farm. And so this was a way like, saying that this is our younger son's garden. And like put little like bricks around, make it pretty, whatever he wants to do. And so this is like, okay, go to town. And on the farm side, you follow the rules, but this is your own endeavor here. So that's kind of a good way for them to be involved without that conflict that goes with like them not doing exactly what you say on the farm. So next it's childcare. This is a very like age dependent thing. I feel like it's definitely a younger kid thing. And you might read between the lines here some of like our own like, I feel like as a parent, when you pawn your kid off of someone else, you kind of feel like a little bit of guilt about this. And so I'm like trying to like make myself feel better. Kids need that adult attention. And if you need to work, even if they're with you in the field, but if you're working, are you really like with them? Are you really like giving them the attention they want? Sometimes it's better, a kid goes, does stuff with someone else. And then at the end of the day, you're done working, they're done with whatever they're doing, and then you can both spend time together. And again, just because our kids would never put up with that kind of situation, like if they're with us, like they do not let us like have attention outside of them. But not all kids are like that. But just because they're not like that and they're not complaining doesn't mean it's still like it doesn't mean they're thriving. So okay. But again, there's different ways to, there's some people have family help that they can call on. Not everyone does. You can hire a sitter or nanny. Then when the kids get older, there's daycare, preschool. And just remember like the value of your time to the farm, especially in that busy season. Even like a couple of days a week can really make the difference between things going smoothly and things falling apart on the farm. So when there isn't any childcare, establish routines again. because this is what helps those transitions. What we found, this was especially like during COVID when the childcare just like disappeared. We ended up with extended work hours so we could work in shift. Like I would get up and go out to work at like 6:30 or something, take that first shift. Kelly would get up, get the kids out of bed, breakfast and whatever. And then, I would come in at like 10 and we could switch. And so I could take over the kids, take them off the farm. And so, make sure like you don't just have one parent doing everything. Spend time away from the farm too. And again, our kids have a tendency to get underfoot when they're on the farm. And so, your employees are not babysitters. This is them like mobbing one of our employees doing some work. And it's not what you hired them for. It's not what you pay them for. So it's one thing like once in a while for like that, but don't like, I feel like it's not fair to your employees to just like offload your kids. It's that. But yeah, we found definitely spending time away from the farm is helpful also. So then more for like the very early days, that first year is going to be difficult. Actually, the first year is challenging. I almost feel like the second year is almost more challenging. In the first year, this is more like what you're seeing in the first year. I guess this is the cross straps of the baby carrier. You've got the baby in front. You kind of do that, put the baby in the carrier and walk around and do some stuff. Or else like you put the baby in the jumperoo and he's going to stay there for a few minutes. Once they become toddlers, they're really like, that kind of option goes away and it becomes more of like try to keep them entertained. They just get a lot more mobile and vocal. So it's almost the second year harder. But still, the first year you have all those naps and everything you have to deal with. Everything's up in the air. If you want to reduce your management load, sometimes people think of cutting acreage, but it's almost easier to cut like plantings, cut crops. That's just one less thing you have to manage. Monitor, again, we live on the farm, so we had a monitor that we could like keep track of naps. That's really helpful. Nowadays, I think you can even like, if you have two smartphones, you can use a smartphone as a monitor and have like super long range. We used to have this like staticky monitor that was, whatever, we got through it. But then prioritize your tasks, you ready to stop. There's things you can do with the baby, things that you can maybe do for part of the time with the baby, and things that like, this is my time, I have to do this, And as the kids grow, both the parents' roles and the kids' roles, will be revisited. This is me and my older son working the market during COVID. This was like during COVID, one of our employees, normally it's two employees there, but one had COVID, or actually had exposed to COVID, they were waiting on a test, so they couldn't come work. So it's like, all right, Ron, we're gonna go work the market together. So, that's like a bit of like stepping in where we were needed. But again, as the kids grew up, Kelly retook some management roles that she had to kind of like step back from. And it was actually really important to her because she was, after a season or two, she was like, look, I feel like a worker. I want to like, not just be a worker, but I want to like run the farm like I used to. Like, all right, fine, you can do the, it's like, have all the stuff that you handed me off before and you have that. And that's again, an advantage of the 2-parent, 2-farmer household is we can like split those tasks and reevaluate who does what. And also, I think it's really important that we both understand both tasks. I've spent days with the kids and she spent days on the farm. And so you don't have that like, one spouse comes home from work and wants a break, the other spouse has been with the kids all day and wants a break. And so you both want a break and nobody like understands where the other one's coming from. And again, as the kids grow up, we reevaluate where they fit into. And then don't forget to take care of the relationship with the partner also. It's super stressful to run a farm and have kids. And so make that, both routine time once in a while as like, this is the time we spend together on a daily basis or weekly basis. And then once in a while, do some like non-routine time, some special events. So that you can relate to each other as adults and as like a couple. Because if you guys, if we fall apart as a couple, then everything comes apart. So you can't don't ignore that. Self-care for adults is nothing fancy. There's a, I don't know, the JM40 put out like a little 10-minute thing about self-care for farmers last winter. And I wasn't sure what to expect, but it was totally like this. It was like, make sure you drink enough water, get enough sleep, keep the sun off. It's like, none of this like days of the spa or anything. It's just like, keep your body from, and your mind, like keep your body and your soul from coming apart at the seams. That's like what we're trying here. And that includes, your friends and family, don't totally fall out of touch with them. Have a non-farming hobby if you can, especially like I'm finally getting back into playing music now that my kids are a little older. I'm trying anyway. It's like hard to get the time, but things that you might have had to step away from earlier. Again, you can revisit as the kids get older. And also, each year we try to go on camping trips or something, and nothing like super long, but at least a few nights to just like, farms over there and we're over here. See, all right. This is the not fun slide. So, because the last week, or it's a not fun slide. There's no way to show me put it. Farms are dangerous. They're dangerous for several reasons. like regular households are dangerous. Farms take like the regular level of hazards in a household and just like multiply by 10 by the variety of hazards, by the severity of the hazards, and then you compound that with the fact that like oftentimes the parents are farming and busy. And it's a big property and you can't always like keep an eye on things. I don't really have like so this isn't like hey, there's a solution. This is don't neglect this. This slide here, you can't really see it. So this is a hydrant. From the hydrant is a hose that like, there's a hose plant there where the hose attaches to the fitting. And the hose plant has like a little tail of the axis. And the greenhouse is there. That's a movable greenhouse. At the time, the greenhouse was there, but my son was playing with something. Went up against that hose plant. He sliced his forearm. It happened over a year ago, and it's like just about like talk about this. And he's fine. We were lucky. There's no like lasting damage, but it was scary. And that's what made me like kind of like start to think about this as pay attention to it. I know other friends have had their kids be injured on their farm too. And it's again, in this case, it was a host. It's like things that it's one thing to have like the mower or the tractor, and as that's super dangerous. But like this piece of metal that's sitting around. So yeah. Let's move on. All right, and then finally, like future work again, as things change as the kids get older, adjust your situation, adjust what the balance of things. And if your that farm circle is well managed, then that allows you to have the time to make these changes and think about them as well, so you're not totally there. So yeah, I think that was the last of it. So she left me, but she had asked a question about hiring first employees. But since she left, then are there any other questions? We got about 10 minutes for Q&A now. So let me talk about hiring. Oh, is that
Well, there was just the earlier question about the hiring a first employee and right at the same time as having a child, how
Yeah.
those pieces fit together.
yeah, so like hiring our first employee, it was like, all right, so honestly, hiring the first employee when you're having your first child is a terrible idea. I wouldn't recommend it. Well, not so much. I mean, you do what you have to get by. The difficulty we found was like, all right, the employee still needs direction, and it's a new employee, but now like I was still working off the farm, and Kelly was like doing the baby stuff, and so really at that stage we were leaving employees alone more than we should have because we couldn't do otherwise, and we didn't have all the systems set up because it was our first employees. We didn't have everything set up as like both like the organization of the farm or anything with down or anything like organized to hand off. So whatever, we got through it. Financially, those were tough years. But again, I don't think we could have gone through it without the employees. So in retrospect, again, that slide of the way, can I do this? I'm just gonna go back to that table of like the timeline, because then you can see, okay, so we were doing that like here when the baby came, like ideally, if, again, this is where you fit into a timeline kind of like this, would really, like, again, if we were having our first child back here when we already have like everything set up, it would have been different. But one thing we found, again, in this year, when I left the off-farm job, for us, it was between, it's, something had to give, it's like either, like, we had to bring in employees or else Kelly wouldn't be able to run the farm. And then even that wasn't enough. So it's like, I kind of had to leave the off-farm job or else like we'd have to shut down the farm. And we felt at that point that if we shut down the farm, it was never coming back. Whereas if I left it outside the farm job and then still decided to shut down the farm, I could always go back to work. So that's kind of how that. But yeah, financially, it was tough. We weren't like in a real like great financial position with the farm. And also like, I feel like now, between James, I think at that time, the only kind of like model farm we had were like J.M. Fortier and Elliott Coleman. And I feel like now there's a few more farms of this kind of scale that we can like say, okay, well, they're making it work. At this time, we didn't really have like both Elliott Coleman and Fortier were bigger farms than we were at that time. We were like, we weren't sure if what we were doing was going to work. So it wasn't going to work. So it was a little bit of a leap of faith, if you will, to like, let's try this. So, I don't know if that answers it. I feel like that was a terrible answer to my question, but there wasn't a great answer. Well, the answer was it was different. Any other questions? You guys want to hear the story about the Boy Scout hiking troop? Let me go to that one. There's always, all right, the Boy Scout. All right. So this was a way, the Boy Scout hike, because I got 5 minutes. The hiking trip was a way to explain how these like constraints work through. And so the story was, all right, so this Starling factory manager is the Boy Scout troop leader for some Boy Scout troop, and it takes them up. They're going to go hike in and camp overnight and then hike out. And so he's hiking in and he's walking and he's trying to like stay to the back. And like, the group of like 15 kids is like the kids in the farm are like sprinting on the trail and they're like a mile in front. And like he's with like the kids in the back. And he's like, well, he's thinking as they walk, trying to keep track of like how much ground they're covering. He's like, we're not going to get there in time. We can't start cooking until I get there. I'm not going to get there till, the last of the kids get there. And we got to do something or else we're going to get there after that. And so the first thing he does is tell everyone to stop. Like, so they all stop, but stay in the order they were. So they're stopped, they all catch up with each other. And then, so when we finished, you had a line of kids, the faster kids in the front, the slowest kids in the back. We said, all right, everyone hold hands. Kids in the back are going to go in the front, and we reverse the order of the line. So now we have the slowest kid in the front, the fastest kids in the back. And then you start walking. And now the whole line is going at the pace of the slowest kid. And you know how fast you're going. And so the faster kids are going crazy because they want to go faster. But at the same time, at least you have a sense of where you're going. The next step is like, why are you going so damn slow? All the kids start yelling at the kid in front because they get frustrated with him. And it turns out he's got like this gigantic pack with like everything in the kitchen sink in it. So the next step was to take that pack off. All his load gets, then you take off and you distribute amongst the other kids. And so that sped up the whole line by addressing this one. And so, the story with that is like, okay, so now how by putting the slowest step in front, now you know how fast the whole line is going. And then by the second step is to take whatever load you can off that constraint. And so in this case, if we talk about sales, like I said, sales should be production. You should grow what you're going to sell. So you put that kind of in the front of your planting. And then, in terms of like the farmer's time, now my time is limiting. I can delegate more stuff you know, even if it's like, even if I feel like it takes more time to get the job done, as long as it's something that's not going to sink the whole farm, I can delegate more tasks. There's one other thing to that. And then the last point to that is like, okay, now you have the line, you know, this, you can kind of see that like the kids who would be able to go faster don't really have to like pay attention to what they're doing as much. They can just kind of walk. And if they stop to tie their shoes, they can just get up and catch up. You know, it's like anything they stop, they can stop, take pictures, whatever, and then they'll catch right back up because they go faster. But whatever you do, keep that kid in front moving, because if he stops, then the entire line stops. And so, you know, that's like maybe someone else ties the shoes as he's walking or something. But that like, you know, resiliency comes in that step where like if you have like slack in all those kids behind, then they can catch up if anything happens. But if you can imagine all the kids like walking at exactly the same pace, then like, you know, the kid 3 back stops to tie his shoes, but he walks the same pace, so he can't catch up. So now there's a gap there. And then like the 4th kid, and that also pulls up everyone behind him. And then like the 5th kid stops to do something else, and there's a gap there. And if you don't have any slack, those gaps keep opening up. So that was the hiking trip. I don't know. So any other questions? That's pretty much.
Thank you.
Thank you.